Something happened in April 2026 that no major tech publication wanted to put on its front page. A small laptop company, one that most people outside the tech world have barely heard of, just shattered the single most powerful lie the PC industry has been telling you for 30 years. There is a number that Microsoft does not want you to think too hard about. That number is 70%. For decades, Windows has held roughly 70% of the global desktop market. 70% of the world's computers, every morning, boot into a Microsoft operating system. Schools, hospitals, government offices, corporate boardrooms, Windows, everywhere, on everything. That dominance was not just a business achievement. It became an assumption, a law of computing, as permanent and unchallengeable as gravity. The idea that this could change, that the foundation could crack, was considered not just unlikely, but absurd. Standard launch, standard choices. Nothing about it was supposed to be a historic moment. And then the sales data came in. The Ubuntu configurations were beating Windows sales. Not doing okay for Linux, not surprisingly decent. Outselling. Windows on identical hardware. Read that again. Framework itself confirmed it. Also nice validation of our approach. The Ubuntu configurations are outselling the Windows ones. The Intel model alone sold through 6 production batches ahead of forecasts. A later social media post added, "Spoke too soon? We're on to batch 8. As in, this is not a niche story about a niche product for niche users. This is a signal that something enormous has already shifted in the computing world, and most people are still acting like it is 2015. What Framework just proved with real sales data in real time is that when you give people a genuine choice between Windows and Linux, a massive portion of them will choose Linux, not reluctantly, not as a last resort. They will choose it first, pay for it first, and wait in a queue for it. And to understand why this is happening right now in 2026, you need to understand what Microsoft has been doing to its own operating system for the past 3 years. Because this story did not start with Framework. It started with a decision made deep inside Microsoft's executive floors. A decision that would cost them something they have never had to think about losing before: the loyalty of their own users. Let us go back to 2024. Microsoft unveiled Windows Recall. The feature was framed as revolutionary. An AI tool that would take a screenshot of everything you do on your computer every few seconds and store it, so you could search your entire digital history. Microsoft called it intelligent. Users called it something else. Windows Recall's launch exposed how quickly AI features can backfire. The screenshot capturing tool initially stored unencrypted images of everything you viewed, creating a privacy nightmare that delayed the feature for over a year. Think about what that means. Microsoft had designed, approved, and shipped to millions of users an AI feature that was silently photographing their screens, storing everything unencrypted, with no meaningful way to opt out. Passwords, bank statements, private messages, medical records, all of it captured, sitting on your own machine, accessible to anyone who could breach the storage. The backlash was immediate. The feature was pulled, reworked. But the damage was not to the feature. The damage was to the trust. And trust, once broken with millions of people simultaneously, does not simply repair itself. But Microsoft did not stop. This is where it gets worse. Between October 2025 and March 2026, many Microsoft 365 users found that the Copilot app had appeared on their PCs without them choosing to install it. That rollout caused frustration, especially among people and organizations that did not want another AI tool added to their systems by default. The backlash grew worse after serious bugs surfaced, including a reported issue that allowed Copilot to access confidential emails. A bug that allowed an AI to read your confidential emails. On a forced installation you never approved. Let that land for a moment. Throughout 2025, Windows 11 was plagued by severe bugs. From security updates that made business PCs unable to boot, to sluggish File Explorer performance and broken dark mode elements, the operating system was falling apart. And in the middle of this unraveling, CEO Satya Nadella proudly announced that 20 to 30% of the code in Microsoft's repositories was now written by software. It was a PR disaster. Users connected the dots. Windows 11 is broken. Microsoft is using AI to write its code. Therefore, Copilot is ruining Windows. The Copilot brand became the scapegoat for every system, failure, crash, and glitch. The hatred reached such a fever pitch that the community coined the term microslop. Microslop. That is what users were calling the operating system that runs 70% of the world's computers. And here is where it gets almost darkly comedic. In early April 2026, it emerged that Microsoft's own terms of service for Consumer Copilot described the tool as for entertainment purposes only, advising users against relying on it for important advice. The TOS stated the tool can make mistakes, and it may not work as intended. This revelation went viral on social media, contrasting sharply with Microsoft's marketing of Copilot as a productivity tool, priced at up to $30 per user per month. So let us be precise about what happened here. Microsoft embedded an AI assistant throughout its operating system without asking you. It forced that AI onto millions of business computers. That AI had bugs allowing it to access private emails. And the company's own fine print said the AI was for entertainment purposes only, while charging $30 a month for it. This is not chaos. This is a company that lost the plot. In an ironic twist, Microsoft's March 11, 2026 Patch Tuesday update accidentally removed its heavily promoted AI assistant Copilot from millions of Windows computers. Users woke up to find that the AI feature they never asked for had mysteriously vanished. And many were celebrating, rather than complaining. Social media erupted, with users calling it the best Windows update ever. Reddit filled with comments like, "Finally, Microsoft did something users actually wanted." User sentiment analysis showed 73% of reactions were positive about the removal. 73% of users celebrated when Microsoft accidentally deleted its own flagship AI feature. You cannot manufacture a more damning statistic than that. That number tells you everything you need to know about the relationship between Microsoft and its users in 2026. Now, while all of this was unfolding inside the Windows ecosystem, something else was happening on the other side of the fence. Quietly, without a billion-dollar marketing campaign, without a flashy product launch event at some rented arena, Linux was growing, and the numbers, when you look at them carefully, are not small. Linux desktop market share reached 7% globally in 2025, marking a growth of over 70% from just 76% recorded in July 2022. The United States crossed the 5% threshold for the first time in June 2025. Current growth trajectories suggest Linux could reach 6% global desktop market share by late 2026 if current trends continue. 70% growth in 3 years. That is not a trend, that is acceleration. And the people driving that acceleration are not just hardcore programmers and system administrators anymore. Behind each of these percentages is a real person who made a deliberate decision to stop paying for an operating system that was increasingly working against them and to try something different. Consider what that shift looks like in concrete terms. Zorin OS developers reported over 780,000 Windows users transitioning to Linux in the wake of Windows 10 end-of-life announcements. Nearly 800,000 people from a single migration wave tied to a single event. And that is only from one Linux distribution. Across the entire ecosystem, the numbers are dramatically larger. But here's what most people are not seeing. The Linux growth story is not one-dimensional. It is not just about frustrated desktop users switching operating systems. It is a multi-front expansion that has been quietly conquering one sector of computing after another for years. Linux holds 99% of worldwide desktop OS share in April 2026, yet it powers 100% of the world's top 500 supercomputers for the 8th consecutive year. Kubernetes production adoption climbed to 82% in 2025, and 96% of production clusters run on Linux. Google Cloud reports 6% of its total VMs run Linux. AWS sits at 5%. Microsoft Azure itself, Microsoft's own cloud platform, runs 8% Linux virtual machines. Read that one more time. Microsoft's own cloud infrastructure is more than 60% Linux. The company that sells Windows, that forces Copilot onto your desktop, that charges you for an operating system, and then fills it with ads and AI features you did not ask for, that company runs its own cloud empire primarily on Linux. That is not hypocrisy. That is a confession. It is Microsoft telling you, through its infrastructure choices, which operating system actually performs better. In the gaming world, long considered Windows' single most unbreakable stronghold, is cracking too. Steam's hardware survey recorded Linux at 5. 33% in March 2026, the highest gaming share ever measured on the platform. 5% of all Steam users are now on Linux. That number sounds modest until you remember that Steam has hundreds of millions of registered accounts, and until you remember that as recently as 2015, Linux on Steam was barely 1%. The trajectory is unmistakable. This is where the Framework story becomes so significant. Because Framework did not just sell more Ubuntu laptops than Windows laptops. Framework proved something the industry had been using as a psychological barrier for 3 decades. The industry line, repeated by Dell, HP, Lenovo, every major OEM, was always the same. Nobody wants Linux pre-installed. Consumers want Windows. They're confused by anything else. We tried Linux. It did not sell. That narrative kept Linux off mainstream shelves. It kept it invisible in Best Buy and Curry's PC World. It made Linux feel like a special interest choice, not a real option. And Framework, with one product launch, destroyed that narrative with sales data. The sales pattern stems from users' ability to install their own operating systems and limited availability of preloaded Linux laptops in the premium segment. Framework's Ubuntu variant is outselling the Windows variant. Framework says the Ubuntu configurations are outselling the Windows ones. And critically, Framework charges extra if you choose to configure the laptop with Windows, while Ubuntu comes free. So the more expensive option, Windows, is losing to the free option, Linux, not because of price alone, but because of preference, because of choice. Because people who are given a real decision, not a fake one dressed up as Windows or nothing, are choosing something different. And this is where everything changes. Because Framework is not alone in signaling this shift. Governments are moving. Entire national bureaucracies are making the calculation and choosing Linux. Denmark's Ministry of Digital Affairs announced a transition from Microsoft to open source platforms between June and November 2025, with half the staff migrating by August. Germany's state of Schleswig-Holstein became the first European region to completely replace Microsoft tools with Linux and LibreOffice in public offices. France operates over 103,000 computers running Gendbuntu, a custom Ubuntu-based distribution used by the National Gendarmerie. These are not experiments. These are permanent institutional decisions made by governments that have decided Microsoft's model, escalating subscription costs, forced AI integrations, privacy concerns, and diminishing user control, is incompatible with how they want to run their public infrastructure. And when national governments start moving, the private sector follows. Not immediately, but inevitably. According to informed sources inside the enterprise software world, the conversation in corporate IT departments has fundamentally changed. The question used to be, why would we switch to Linux? Now the question is increasingly, why are we still paying Microsoft? And those two questions lead to very different procurement decisions. While Windows 11 was bleeding reputation throughout 2025, Apple launched the MacBook Neo, priced at an aggressive $599. The fanless A18 Pro-powered laptop fundamentally disrupted the entry-level PC market. Millions of users who were holding on to aging Windows 10 machines, refusing to upgrade to Windows 11 due to its reputation for Copilot bloat, ads, and bugs, jumped ship to macOS. Microsoft was being squeezed from two directions simultaneously. From the premium end, Apple was taking users with clean software experiences and powerful hardware. From the freedom end, Linux was taking users with privacy, control, and zero cost. And Windows was caught in the middle, trying to sell an operating system that its own user base was publicly mocking. What most people are not seeing is how this creates a compounding problem for Microsoft that goes beyond quarterly earnings. Operating system dominance is self-reinforcing when it exists. Developers build for Windows because users have Windows. Users buy Windows because developers build for it. But that loop has a breaking point. And the breaking point is when enough users leave, that developers start asking whether they also need to support Linux as a primary target, not a secondary one. That inflection point has not arrived yet. But the trajectory of the numbers suggests it is closer than anyone in Redmond is comfortable admitting publicly. Microsoft was not acting out of the goodness of their hearts when they began pulling back Copilot. Apple forced them to. That admission, buried in industry analysis but visible if you know where to look, tells you something important about Microsoft's current strategic position. They are reacting. They are not setting the agenda anymore. For 30 years, Microsoft set the agenda of personal computing. Windows was what computing looked like. The question was never whether to use Windows. The question was which version of Windows you are on. That era is ending. Windows lead Pavan Davuluri acknowledged the pain points users experienced, admitting the OS went off track with aggressive AI expansion while basic stability issues persisted. The company shifted focus to core stability fixes in 2026 after 2025's string of major update issues eroded user trust. The head of Windows admitting publicly that the operating system went off track. That is a level of institutional acknowledgement that does not happen in healthy companies. That is what happens when the feedback from the market becomes impossible to ignore. In March 2026, Microsoft announced it would pull back Copilot integration from Photos, Notepad, Snipping Tool, and widgets. A rollback framed as a commitment to integrating AI where it is most meaningful. Mozilla's position was clear. Microsoft's sudden pivot toward being intentional about Copilot is an admission that the company repeatedly made choices to serve its business interests at the expense of its users. Mozilla, the organization that makes Firefox, publicly called out Microsoft for doing exactly what everyone suspected, making decisions that serve the company, not the user. And that critique landed because it was accurate, and because millions of people already knew it was accurate from personal experience. Now step back and look at the full picture, because the real story here is not about framework. Framework is the symptom, not the disease. The real story is about 30 years of accumulated user frustration finally finding somewhere to go. The real story is about an industry that told people they had no choice, and what happens when that lie gets exposed. Because the lie was never that Linux was too hard. The lie was that Linux was never presented as an option. It was kept off mainstream shelves. It was kept out of mainstream conversations. The message, delivered subtly but consistently by every major computer manufacturer, was Windows is computing. Everything else is for specialists. And that message worked for decades because there was no moment that punctured it completely. Framework punctured it, not with marketing, not with a keynote, with sales data. The standard objection to Linux, that it is too complicated for ordinary people, has been steadily losing its validity for years. Ubuntu in 2026 installs in under 20 minutes, runs on hardware that Windows 11 has declared incompatible, does not show you ads on your own desktop, does not force install AI tools that accidentally read your emails, does not take screenshots of everything you do, and does not require you to navigate terms of service that describe your productivity suite as entertainment only. It simply works. And increasingly, it works for the kind of person who never considered themselves a Linux user. The Linux operating system market is projected to grow from approximately $22 billion in 2024 to nearly $100 billion by 2032 at a compound annual growth rate of 29%. A $100 billion market growing at 20% annually. Those are not niche numbers. Those are the numbers of a technology that is in the process of fundamentally reshaping its sector. And the desktop growth, while smaller in percentage terms, is happening in the context of a hostile environment. An environment where Linux is not pre-installed on machines at mainstream retailers. An environment where most software advertisements still say download for Windows and Mac. An environment where Linux users are in 2026, treated as edge cases by most of the industry. And even in that hostile environment, Linux grew 70% in 3 years. What happens when the environment becomes less hostile? What happens when more manufacturers follow Framework's lead and offer Linux pre-installed as a genuine supported option? What happens when the next major Windows incident, because there will be one, because the pattern has repeated itself with accelerating frequency, pushes another wave of millions toward the door? The real question that nobody in the mainstream technology press is asking out loud is this: has the moment already passed where Microsoft could have rebuilt the trust it needed to hold its dominant position? Because trust is not rebuilt with policy announcements. It is not rebuilt with a blog post from the head of Windows. It is not rebuilt by quietly removing Copilot from Notepad and hoping people notice. Trust is rebuilt through sustained, consistent, years-long demonstration that you are making decisions in the user's interest. And Microsoft has not begun that demonstration yet. They have begun the announcement of the intention to begin the demonstration, which is not the same thing. Meanwhile, Microsoft has now decided to reinstate the forced Copilot installation and plans to complete the rollout to all Microsoft 365 users by July 1st. Even after the backlash, even after the bugs, even after the confidential email access incident, even after 73% of users celebrated when it was accidentally deleted, Microsoft is bringing it back, forced, to everyone. Think about what that tells you about the gap between what the company is saying publicly and what it is actually doing strategically. And this is where we arrive at the question that Framework's sales data raises but does not answer. Because the shift happening right now is real and it is measurable. Linux is growing. Windows is losing users at every demographic level, to macOS at the premium end, to Linux at the freedom end, to mobile devices at the casual use end. The pillars of Microsoft's dominance are eroding simultaneously. And the company's response, so far, has been to add more AI, charge more money, and send emails announcing renewed commitment to quality. That is not a turnaround strategy. That is a holding action. The world's most powerful computers run Linux. The world's most critical cloud infrastructure runs Linux. The world's most innovative governments are migrating to Linux. The world's most technically sophisticated developers overwhelmingly use Linux. And now, for the first time in the history of commercial computing, a mainstream laptop company has proven that when regular people are offered a genuine choice, They will choose Linux over Windows in meaningful numbers. What Framework proved in April 2026 is not that Linux has won. Linux has not won. The numbers are too small and the inertia is too large for anyone to make that claim honestly. What Framework proved is something more fundamental and more dangerous for Microsoft. Framework proved that the choice is real, that it works, that people want it, and that the only reason it has not happened faster and at greater scale is that the industry never offered it properly. That excuse is gone now. The question is no longer whether millions of people would ditch Windows given a proper alternative. We have the answer to that question. The question now is, how many more sales cycles? How many more forced installations? How many more privacy scandals? How many more bugs that celebrate themselves by accidentally removing features users never wanted? How many more of those moments does it take before the trickle of people making Framework's choice becomes a river? Because the data says the river is already forming. And upstream, the rain is not stopping.